the matter of intrinsic value as it applies to some of the inevitables, given that the overpayment risk now is high and the share repurchases that are going on there?
Yeah, well, we won't stick a price on them. We tell you that they are absolutely wonderful businesses run by sensational people, and that they are selling at prices that are higher than they've sold at most of the time. But that, they may well be worth it and worth a lot more, even in terms of present terms, or it may turn out they're a couple of years ahead of themselves. We don't know the answer to that. We know we're very happy owning them. Gillette does not repurchase its shares, or hasn't in any significant quantity for many years. Coke consistently repurchases its shares. We generally like the policy of companies that have really wonderful businesses repurchasing their shares. There aren't that many super businesses in the world, and the idea of owning more and more of a company like that over a period of time has an appeal to us, and almost an appeal regardless of price. The problem is that most companies that repurchase their shares, are frequently so-so businesses, and they're being done for motivations other than intensifying the interests of the shareholders in a wonderful business. But where you really know you have a wonderful business, and we think most of the ones we own are anywhere from extremely good to wonderful, we think it usually makes a lot of sense. It's hard to do things intelligent with money in this world, and Coke has been very intelligent about using their capital particularly to fortify and improve their bottler network around the world. I mean, they've done a terrific job that way. That was a neglected area for a long time, and that comes first. But there's only so far you can go with that, and to enhance the ownership of the shareholders in a company like Coca-Cola. When we bought our first Coca-Cola in '88, we bought about 6.2% of the company. And at that time, they may have been 600 million servings, not any more than that a day. So we had an interest in 36 or 37 million servings. Now we have 8% of 900 million plus. So we have an interest in 75 million or so servings a day. 75 million people are drinking Berkshire Hathaway's share of Coca-Cola products today in an 8-ounce serving. And the profit's gone up a little per serving. So that gets pretty attractive, and we just soon they keep doing that. The bottling thing's actually kind of interesting, and a fellow from Omaha, or at least lived in Omaha for a long time, Don Keogh, had a lot to do with this, and Roberto had plenty to do with it too, obviously. But Asa Candler, back in the late 1880s, in a series of transactions, I think some of it's a little fuzzy exactly as to the timing of them, but he essentially bought the whole Coca-Cola company for $2,000. And that may be the smartest purchase in the history of the world. And then in 1899, I believe it was, a couple of fellows from Chattanooga came down. And in those days, soft drinks were sold over the counter to people in drugstores primarily. But there was a little bottling going on. There's already was somebody bottling in Mississippi, as I remember. But a couple of fellows came down and they said, bottling's got a future, and you're busy on the fountain side of the business, so why don't you let us develop the bottling system? And I guess Mr. Candler didn't think much of bottling, so he gave them a contract in perpetuity for almost all of the United States. For $1, he sold it to them, and gave them the right to buy Coca-Cola syrup at a fixed price forever. So Asa, who had scored with his $2,000 in a rather big way, managed to write what, it's easy for us to look back at, but it certainly looks like one of the dumbest contracts in history. And of course, as the years went by, and particularly around World War II, when the price of syrup was the primary ingredient in terms of cost in syrup, was sugar. And sugar went wild during and after World War I in price. And so here was a guy that in effect had contracted to sell sugar at a fixed price forever. And he'd also given these people perpetual rights and so on. In those days, they sold these sub-rights to bottler contracts, and those were usually the distance that a horse could go in a day and come back. That was sort of the circle that you gave people. And the Coca-Cola Company was faced over the years with the problem of having the bottling system, which soon became the dominant system for distribution of Coke, being subject to a contract where there was no price flexibility and where the contracts ran in perpetuity. And of course, every bottler on his deathbed would call his children and his grandchildren around, and he'd prop himself up and croak out in his last breath, don't let him screw with the bottling contract, and then he'd croak. So the Coca-Cola Company faced this for decades, and they really couldn't do much about that bottling system for a long time. And Roberto and Don Keogh and some other people spent 20 or 25 years getting that rationalized. There were lawsuits back in the 20s and some things. But it was a huge project, but it made an enormous difference over time in the value of the company. And that's what I mean when I talk about intellectual capital, is because you aren't going to get results on that in a day or a week or a month or a year if you set out to get that all rationalized. But they decided that to get the job done, they had to do this. And that took capital, and they used capital to get that job done, but they used capital beyond that to repurchase shares in a big way. And it's been very smart, and I hope they are repurchasing shares probably as we talk, and that's fine with me. Charlie?
Well, I do think Coca-Cola Company is one of the most interesting cases in the history of business, and it ought to be way more studied than it is. And there's just lesson after lesson after lesson in the history of the Coca-Cola Company. And but it's too long a story for today.